And so, with no further ado, I'm going to jump into today's message, the Mother's Day 2020 message. The title today is Courage and Uncertainty. And the truth is, there seems to be a contradiction in those two ideas, between the idea of courage and uncertainty, because doesn't courage need a certain level of certainty? Doesn't courage need certain level of clarity and understanding? Can we be in the dark and still be courageous? And so in today's message, it's actually a story about a mother, but it's going to be very much for us all. And so we're going to see from a mother what real courage looks like and how uncertainty can factor into that courage and that faith. And so we're going to share the story today of Jochebed. Just for fun, you can try to say that with me. I'm sure none of you put that down as your favorite TV mom this morning, but the story of Jochebed comes from the book of Exodus chapter 1 and chapter 2, and she is the mother of the famous Bible character that we all probably have heard of, Moses. And so going way back to the beginning of the story, the Israelites had gone into the country of Egypt during a time of great famine, and so they were sheltering kind of as refugees there, but they were welcomed originally by the Egyptians. And so the Egyptians blessed them and gave them land and allowed them to live in their land for a while. And there was a positive relationship between the Egyptians and the early Hebrews, the early Israelites. And that lasted for a while, but eventually the Israelites began to grow very numerous in the country of Egypt. They were just reproducing at great rates, and it began to make the Egyptians nervous. And so as this racial and religious and ethnic outsiders, as they began to multiply, it began to unsettle the Egyptians. They began to think, man, if we're attacked by a foreign army, we have this distinct people among us. What if they teamed up with outsiders? And so they really began to oppress the Israelites. They began to treat them harshly, even using them as slaves. All of this was kind of a covert attempt to suppress the population growth. They wanted to shrink the number of Israelites. And eventually this just became more and more brutal and more blatant as it went forward. And eventually it turned to outright infanticide. The Egyptian government was forcing Jewish parents to throw baby boys into the Nile River to kill them. And we're not told right off the bat how many Jewish mothers obeyed this law, but we are told the story of how one particular mother courageously defied this law. And that mother was Jochebed. And so Jochebed gives birth to her youngest son, who we come to know later as Moses. And so I'm going to read the verse of her kind of falling in love with this baby boy. Genesis chapter 2, verses 2 through 4 says this: When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket and hid him, or for him, and coated it with tar and pitch. And then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds in the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Now, before we go on with the story, we're going to pause. I'm going to just talk about two things that we're going to focus on for a few minutes. First of all, love motivated Jochebed. And secondly, she had no idea how this would turn out. So the first point is simple: noble courage needs a proper motivation. I mean, I love the weird way that it words it. It says she saw that he was a fine child, so she hid him. I mean, is that saying that if Moses had been an ugly baby, she wouldn't have saved him? No, that's not what it's saying. I think what it's really trying to tell us is that she was frozen with fear and she didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to respond. She was kind of locked up until the moment she looked at that baby for the first time. And then in that moment, this mother knew that no matter what, she would not be obeying this order to kill her child. But I do want to stop and just focus in on what her motive was. I want you to think about the purity of her motive. I mean, this was not like a combative, rebellious attitude in Jochebed. This was not an us against them, Egyptians against Israelites kind of. It wasn't a political or an ideological battle that was going on that she was participating in. That wasn't what was going on. This wasn't an angry or hateful or like retaliatory spirit in her. This wasn't even an instinct of self-preservation, right? You see, Jochebed's civil disobedience came from a pure and noble motive. It was love, right? Love. She looked at this child and she fell in love, and that love motivated everything that came next. And so I want to point this out because the truth is this: it is possible to be on the right side of an issue, but still have wrong motives. You see, you can have the right stances, but the wrong heart. And so Jesus taught us that the whole law of God could be boiled down to love. He said, listen, love God with all of your heart, all of your mind, all of your soul, all of your strength, and love your neighbor like you love yourself. And so for the Christian, love really should be what motivates everything we do. So if it cannot ultimately be squared with a driving motive of love, then it's really hard for a Christian to make a case of being motivated by something or being involved with something or jumping in or bandwagoning with something. And so I want to be really clear about this because we live in very uncertain times right now. And there are so many weird things that we all have to figure out right now together, right? I mean, we got to figure things out. Like, do I go back to life as normal now? Do I go back to business? Do I go back to my job? Do I go back to my gym? Do I go back to all these places, all these activities? Or do I stay home? And what's the loving thing to do? And what's the right thing to do? And what's the moral thing to do? Do I wear a mask or do I not give in to what some people think might be hysteria? Do I protect those that might be the most vulnerable around me, or do I only really worry about the fact that it probably won't hurt me? Do I protest what I think might be government overreach, or do I trust governing officials, or do I proceed with extreme suspicion? You see, there's so many choices and so many blurry lines and seasons like today. We're having to answer questions that we've never had to answer before. And so with all those questions, I cannot answer all those questions for you. But I can and I will tell you this. If you are brutally honest about motive and heart, it will shed considerable light on how you should proceed. You see, sometimes the issue isn't the issue. For Christians, sometimes the heart is really the issue. And if you get the heart right, if you get the motive right, then your actions tend to take care of themselves. Then what's the right path becomes so much clearer. You see, as Jesus followers, we have to square our actions and our words and our positions on things with a consuming love for God and a consuming love for our neighbors. And so we cannot allow ourselves to be driven by anger or by pride or even by fear or by a competitive spirit. And if we're honest, so often as we get into our positions and we begin to argue and fight for certain ideas or courses of action, the truth is so often we're motivated by pride or by this sense that we know more than others, and our motive isn't really love at times. And so as we move forward, man, I really want us this morning to be challenged by this mother who did some crazy and some even disobedient things, but her motive is what we need to focus on this morning. See, courage in uncertain times, it requires a pure motive. And now while her motives were clear and her actions were courageous, Jochebed had no idea what she was doing, though. And I want to point that out because her cluelessness should comfort us, right? The fact that she had no idea how to navigate this, and yet she navigated it. So as Jochebed hides this baby for 3 months, it becomes clear over these 3 months that this is not a sustainable solution, right? So right off the bat, she's just doing whatever she knows to do. She's hiding the baby. If you're like me, I try to imagine how this played out. And so in my mind, Jochebed was one of those moms that had the little purse dogs, right? And so she had the little yappy dogs. And so I think she kind of got a little bit of fur and she dressed the baby up and she carried the baby in one of those like purse dog purses, right? And so she carried it at her side, keep her. And then eventually as the baby's cooing turns into words, she's thinking, this is not going to be sustainable. Eventually they're going to figure this out. And this baby keeps getting bigger. I'm going to need to get a bigger bag, right? And so, no, I mean, there's so many ways she could have hidden the baby, but as this baby grows and he becomes a toddler, then a child, and she's thinking, man, I can't keep this baby locked in a closet. Eventually, it's going to become a man, right? And I can't hide that forever. And so she comes up with a plan. She has no idea what she's doing, but yet she comes up with a plan. And this whole plan, you have to understand, is filled with uncertainty. Right? This idea that she's going to make a basket and put a baby in a basket and float it in a river and what's going to happen next. I mean, this whole thing is filled with uncertainty, but she's banking on the idea that an Egyptian will see this baby and not be able to carry out what the law says. She's banking on humanity. She's banking on decency. Ultimately, she's banking on God himself somehow intervening. And so she puts this baby in a floating basket. And perhaps, she's thinking some kind-hearted Egyptian's going to find him. And I really think that she's hoping that it's someone who even lives close to her, right? So I imagine Jochebed must have lived close to the river. And she takes the baby in the basket down to the river in an area where all the people she knows, the other Egyptians she knows, and she's hoping maybe there's some decent neighbors around here, and if they take this baby, then even though I won't be able to raise him, I can watch him grow if these people will take him and keep him. And so that's what I think is her best case scenario, but it's so filled with uncertainty. And just an interesting tidbit I want to share with you guys is that the word that it translates there as basket, it says that she put him in a papyrus basket. There's only one other place in Scripture where that same word is used, and it's translated not as basket, but as ark. You see, the only other place in the Old Testament where that word is used is in the story of Noah's ark, and it's the same exact word. So as this story is being relayed, you have to understand that the Jochebed is imagining this basket like Noah's ark. She's thinking back to this story that was ages old to her, that she grew up hearing about how God rescued the human race in a floating boat called an ark. And so with that boat, there was so much uncertainty. Noah built it. He went into it even before there was a flood, closed himself in. And then once he did, he had no idea how long would he be in there? Where would he end up in the world? What would the world look like? He didn't know any of that. He just knew that once he entered that ark, he was entering God's care. And so Jochebed, in the same way, didn't know what would happen once this baby went into this tiny ark. But she did know that he was in God's care in the same way Noah was. You see, there was a handoff here, and it was from her hands into God's. She was trusting that now that she had done everything in her power that she could do, she was trusting that God would do his part, that he would do what only he could do. So you see, uncertainty and courage can coexist when we recognize that we are not the most important factor in the equation. You see, fear rules when we think that things depend primarily on us. Like when you think that you're the master of your own destiny, fear is going to rule. When you think that everything depends on you figuring it out, fear is going to rule. But as Jochebed places that baby in that basket, she's placing him in the care of God. And I want to say this really clearly. God cares more than we do. Whatever the problem is, whatever the issue is, if you've got an issue, I want you to understand this. God cares more than you do. Whatever the situation, whatever the worry, whatever the problem, God cares more than you do. I mean, what is that problem, that circumstance that you need to place into that basket, into that ark? Is it the faith of your kids? Are you just worried about how they're going to grow and develop in their faith? Is it an adult child that's just making troubling choices and they're worrying you and you're racked with fear over it? Is it the health and the vulnerability of a young child? Is it your finances? Is it trouble in your marriage? Is it a learning disability or other developmental concerns for your child? Listen, you are their parent for just a handful of years. But God has been and will be their Father for all of eternity. His commitment to them is greater than yours. I'll say that again, because as loving as a mother can be, as loving as a parent can be, you are only their parent for a handful of years, but God has been and will be their Father for all of eternity, and his commitment is greater than even yours is. You see, he didn't call himself a father because fatherhood existed. He invented great fatherhood to show us how committed he is to us. The model, right? He gave us the model to show us what his commitment level is to us. You see, he's more committed to this thing than you are. And this truth applies to more than just parenting. Whatever it is that we're uncertain about, God cares more about that than you do. As you think about your future and maybe your job or your family, or man, what will education look like coming out of this? What will anything in our world look like going forward, coming out of this? Understand this. You are not the one that created this world. God is. This is his. This is his world. He cared enough to design it and to build it and to send his only son, Jesus, to die in order to redeem it. God is more invested in this than we are. This is his world. So when Jochebed places Moses in that basket, things were out of her control, but they were not out of control, right? Things were finally in the hands of the one who could make the most difference, right? She was placing control in the hands of her father. So now back to the story. Baby Moses, he's placed in the basket. And Moses' big sister is at a distance watching from the shore to see what will happen. And I really love that little detail is shared, because it makes it clear that Jochebed, as the mom, didn't have this master plan. She didn't know exactly what was going to happen. She was trusting God, and she was doing all that she could think to do. And so she knew that she couldn't be there. People would figure it out and put it all together. But she has her daughter there watching, and they're ready to kind of flex and figure it out as they go. But she wants to know what's going to happen. So big sister is watching, and suddenly there's this plot twist. Nobody expected it. Pharaoh's daughter comes down to the river to bathe, and she sees this basket floating. And in what seemed like it would be certain doom, I mean, certainly someone from the palace itself is going to follow the king's rule. Certainly she's going to turn this baby over to be killed. But in a shocking plot twist, she opens the basket, she looks in, and at just the right moment, this helpless baby begins to cry. And the Pharaoh's daughter, her heart is broken. And the verse tells us in that moment she felt sorry for this baby, and she decides immediately that she's going to adopt the baby. She's going to keep it and raise him. And then Moses' big sister is standing by. She's watching and she thinks fast. So she runs over and she offers, hey, I'll go get a Hebrew woman who can nurse this baby for you, because Pharaoh's daughter hasn't had a baby yet. So she's not nursing. She cannot nurse the child. And so Pharaoh's daughter accepts, and big sister goes and fetches mom. She goes and gets the baby's mother himself. And so get this. God works this situation out so that Moses' life is saved and his own mother gets paid to care for him and nurse him for 2 years. Now, the story doesn't end there. And I'm sure it was the hardest thing Jochebed ever did at the end of that 2 years, to give Moses, to give this baby boy back to Pharaoh's daughter. But that's what she did. She goes and returns 2-year-old Moses to Pharaoh's daughter. And that's technically the moment when Pharaoh's daughter named him Moses. And it's significant because Moses means I drew him out. And so the name is commemorative of what happened. Like his name forever meant I was drawn out. I was plucked out of the river. And this is meaningful that he was drawn out, because not only was Moses drawn out of the water, but he was drawn out of his people. God drew Moses out from among his people to rescue him and to save him. But it goes further than that. God drew Moses out not just to save him, but to prepare him for what was to come. He drew him out and put him in the palace so that he could be trained and educated by the leaders of the empire of the day, because God was going to use him to ultimately lead his own people out, Israel, and free them from their Egyptian bondage. So God would use the one that he drew out to draw his people out of slavery entirely. You see, this whole thing was completely out of Jochebed's control, but thank God it was, because her hope was only to save one baby. But God had so much more in mind. God knew that he could use this situation to change everything, not just then, but for all human history. So how do we apply this story this morning? Well, first of all, a great mother does all that she can do, but she still recognizes that she is not the most important factor. God is. I want you to take a deep breath. If you're one of those moms, or even just a parent, and you just so much weight, you're taking so much responsibility, so much, and you just cannot catch a break, and just understand that you're not the most important factor. While your love is great and while your sacrifice is immense, the most important factor in this is God. And you see, great love, it motivates us to do all that we can while we can. But we must recognize that even a mother's love pales in comparison to God's. And his ability is as limitless as ours is limited. And then what does this mean for the rest of us, for those non-mothers out there, all the rest of us? Well, first of all, we find ourselves in a very uncertain season. But the good news is that courage and uncertainty can coexist. But it requires us to trust the partnership that God set up. It requires us to be motivated by love in what we do, in the positions we take, in how we speak, and how we interact. It requires us to do what's in our power to do, but then to trust God with the parts that only he can do. And in the end, God is able to do so much more than what we're looking for. He's able to do what we're looking for, but then so much on top of that. You see, Jochebed was only hoping to save a baby. But unbeknownst to her, she was partnering with God in the liberation of a nation and the crushing of a harsh empire. God was doing so much more than she could have even imagined. Guys, we're going to pray together, and then I'm going to share a little more information about the rest of the service today, and then we're going to get out of here. Father, I thank you for your word. I thank you for stories that we have to look back on like Jochebed. I thank you that we can see a love that's pure. God, I thank you that we can see a faith that's in you, and even in uncertainty, but maybe even especially in uncertainty, you come through bigger than we could ever imagine. That we do what we can do, what's within our power, but we're not the most important factor in this equation. You are. And so I thank you for showing this to us this morning, God. I pray that you would encourage our moms. I pray that you would reward our moms richly today, that you would rain down blessing. And I pray for all of us that we would be challenged, that we would grow from the story of this great mom. And we give you thanks in Jesus' name. Amen. We share this each week, but again, there's going to be a phone number at the bottom of the screen. We'd love to interact with you. If you would like special prayer, you can text prayer to that number, and we're going to communicate with you on that. If you would like, if maybe this morning you've put your trust in Jesus, the Bible makes it really clear that everyone who calls on the name of Jesus will be saved. It's really very simple. We're all broken. We're all sinful. But Jesus, the righteous Son of God, came and lived the life that we should have lived. And then he died the death on the cross that our sin deserved. And he raised to life eternal. When we put our trust in his death, our sins can be forgiven by the Father. And we begin a new kind of relationship with our Father in heaven. And we're promised ultimately eternity in heaven once this life ends. And all of that begins simply through putting our faith and our trust in Jesus. And so if you'd like to make that decision today, or maybe, it's just been a long time and you knew Jesus at a different point in your life, but you're making that decision to kind of return your faith in Jesus this morning, then just go ahead and take a minute, text Jesus to that phone number on the screen, and we can interact with you through that. We'll share some resources with you. But guys, I want to say this: God bless you. Have a great day. Next Sunday we'll share a video. We'll give some more updates about what the return to live in-person services will look like and exactly when that will take place. But so we'll share more next week. We're looking forward to being back with you in person. That day will be coming soon. And so guys, God bless you. Have a great Mother's Day. The numbers are on the screens. Guys, God bless you. Have a great day.